Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. I know this is a later meeting, but I hope this means that it's a little bit more convenient and easier for you guys to join us tonight. For those of you who may not know me, I do see some familiar names, but I also see some new ones, and that's really great to see. My name is Lizeth Gonzalez. I am a Principal Comprehensive Planner at Serpent. And we're here tonight to talk about the virtual open house for the Raynham Master Plan, which is really exciting because it's the big reveal and kind of what we've all been waiting for over the past 2 years. Before I dive into some of the details of the plan and how to really interpret it, I want to start off with just some virtual meeting reminders, which I'm sure everyone is very familiar with this new reality. But during the presentation, please remain muted. It just makes it easier to hear and keep the recording nice and clean. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to use the raise hand feature or also type your message in the chat window and I will check that at the end. If you're joining by phone, which I don't think anyone is tonight, but we did have someone on Monday, *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand and lower it. I'll be looking at the chat and watching for any hands going up, but I'll keep an eye out for that. If for any reason there is some type of disruption or inappropriate behavior, the dreaded Zoom bombing, I'll end the meeting and use the same link to join back in about 5 minutes. But I haven't experienced that yet, so fingers crossed our good luck continues. As I mentioned, I am a member of Serpent, which means that they're the regional planning agency for Southeastern Mass. As a community of ours, we, in working with Raynham, have really had the role of shepherding this process for the community. Anything that you hear in the master plan, all the conclusions that we reached, they're not things that we recommended or thought up of ourselves. They're all originating from comments that we received through public workshops or activities that we put out there in the public. So I want you to know that our role here as a consultant for the master plan was really to listen to you guys and to put that all together into a plan that really reflects your goals and visions for the future of the town. I touched a little bit on the process of, the workshops, but also some of the activities that we experienced during the master plan. Over the course of the last 2 years, we had 5 public workshops. Our first one back in the summer of 2020 started with a broad discussion really of what it is that residents wanted to see in Raynham across all the different topics that you see listed here. And I have to say, and I give a lot of kudos to the town because we started and kicked off this plan right at the kind of beginning of the pandemic when uncertainty was really high and they trusted us to really shepherd this process virtually. And I think that's really important and a lot of credit to the fact that we've had really good engagement, not only through these public workshops, but through the activities as well. What followed this discovery workshop were 3 topic-based workshops. That means we honed in really deep on those specific topics just to get a conversation going. And that leads us all to where we are tonight, which is the big reveal of the plan, an opportunity to share some of the findings, but give you a chance to really sit with the plan yourself before that plan goes to the town and we present it to them and make those final changes. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the feedback methods. I mentioned activities. What are those? If you did them, I'm really happy that you guys had a chance to take a look at those. But I also want to give you guys a kind of a broad idea of what the results were and who responded really. So one of the activities that followed us from day 1 of the master plan was the master plan survey. This survey generated about 530 responses, and half of those who responded were residents who've lived in town for more than 16 years. This tells us that people who live in Raynham, who have a long history of being here, are invested in its future, and that's really important. Additionally, we also found that at least 50% of those who responded were between 35 and 54 years of age. Another really interesting anecdote because it tells us that those people who are interested in Raynham's future are those parents with kids, first-time home buyers, young professionals, but also people who are entering their middle age and in the next few years are starting to think about retirement and how that might change their outlook on housing or economic development. So just some things that kind of helped us start the conversation during the course of the master plan. Another activity that followed us from day one of the master plan was the mapping exercise. This was a really neat way to really pinpoint challenges, solutions, and ideas to specific places in town. Over the course of those 2 years, we generated 730 interactions, and interactions really are made up of the points that you see on the map, comments on those points, as well as likes and dislikes on those points. And I want to call out some of the topics that were kind of the most talked about. Services and facilities, we almost got to 50% of interactions to talk about services and facilities, which was really interesting because, we have the public safety building to think about. We have all, some ADA issues in town, but we also noticed that people use the services and facilities topic to also talk about issues on roads, like if there's a crosswalk that needs to be put somewhere or there's a dangerous intersection. And I think that's because a lot of people saw that the responsibility of fixing those and calling attention to those was on behalf of the town and something that was a part of that, envelope of services that they provide. Interestingly enough, and I should say this really goes to the credit of the agricultural heritage and history of the town itself, 21% of the interactions were about open space and recreation. This tells us that in the same way that residents value board and colony, visit it, really take advantage of that great resource in town, they're looking for more opportunities. And that's a theme that really came across in the master plan itself. The website, though it wasn't a necessarily a feedback method and loop, it was more just a way to keep everyone updated, especially as we kicked off this plan and carried it out virtually. I think it was really interesting and a great way to get people up to date. If they weren't able to attend a workshop, you could see a summary of what happened, watch the recording, and access the presentation. And really just a way to get in touch with the project team and get access to all the data and information. And of course, like we're doing here tonight, we always have a workshop to really jumpstart a conversation about different topics of the master plan. And for each one, we had at least 2 to 3 activities and 2 meetings for each workshop. So for a total of 10. So this here is the cover of the master plan, that big reveal that I've been referencing. When you take a look at the master plan, read through the document, skim through chapters that you're interested in, I really want you to think about the shelf life of this plan. It's meant to be, and master plans typically go from a 5 to 10-year horizon. So we're looking far into the future. It's a long-term plan. But when you read it, I also want you to think about how user-friendly it is, if it's concise and if it's easy to read, because we don't want this plan to just be something that sits on a shelf and is used by, someone who knows what the plan is talking about. This should be as useful for the town as it is for the residents to know the direction of where the town is going. And with that, I want to start getting into what I like to call the recipe for success of the master plan. And that's made up of 3 elements: the vision statement, the goals, and the strategies. And I'll start off with the vision statements because these are kind of the foundation of all the topics of the master plan, and they're complemented by those goals and strategies that I just mentioned. I'm going to go through some of them just to give you an idea of our baseline of where we're working from and how we establish some of our more specific goals and strategies to really take this vision and break it down a little bit into more achievable steps. When it comes to land use, we really wanted to think about encouraging development in town in the appropriate areas and making sure that where development occurs, it looks a certain way and it fits the neighborhoods that it's in. And additionally, we also wanted to talk about creating and developing a sort of vibrant and walkable, distinct town center. We know that Raynham Center is kind of that place that people always think of, but it lacks a lot of the traditional characteristics of a town center. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to create something of that. When it comes to housing, I think it's really interesting to think of the two paths for housing as affordable, both subsidized, but also market rate affordable. So we need to think about our responsibilities to the state in reaching our 10% subsidized affordable housing, but also thinking about how we can ensure that those residents who are aging and entering their senior years can remain in their community. And sometimes that means creating different diverse housing. So maybe it's cottages, maybe it's expanding that adult retirement community bylaw. And so we tackle it from a couple different perspectives. When it comes to economic development, there is still some room for commercial and industrial growth in town, but again, in those targeted, very specific areas. I also heard during our conversations that there's a call for more small businesses. People want to see those curated special shops that really speak to Raynham's culture. So when someone says, hey, I'm going to Raynham, where should I go? You can tell them, hey, visit this shop. It has great sandwiches or great ice cream, or they sell these great crafts. That's one thing that we heard when it comes to economic development. We're thinking big, but we're also thinking how to help mom and pop shops. Natural and cultural resources, as I mentioned earlier, people in town love the open space. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. When we talk about natural and cultural resources, we're thinking about local events in town, cultural amenities, how people interact with their community members. And while we want to keep supporting those cornerstone events like Raynham Community Day, the Memorial Day Parade, as well as the Fishing Derby, we also want to think about how we can expand those opportunities and build upon them. Open space and recreation, like I mentioned, everyone loves their green space in town, those beautiful landscapes, the farmland, and the agricultural history. What can we do to continue to preserve and protect more of these spaces while creating the appropriate access? I heard that a lot when it came to the Taunton River, creating some type of access point for kayaking, or Hewitt's Pond to improve parking in order to actually get to it. Almost lastly, but not quite, services and facilities. I know at the top of everyone's list is the public safety complex, and that's definitely part of it. I agree, that should be there too. Providing modern and accessible facilities to meet the needs of all our departments, but also consider the future use of facilities that are soon to be vacant or are currently underutilized. That's really important. And lastly, transportation and circulation. There are two paths to this topic and chapter. It really talks about kind of our road safety, the condition of our roads, congestion, where those dangerous intersections are. But it also addresses a kind of new demand that we heard in this master plan for different types of ways to get around town. I heard people want to get around their neighborhoods and get to certain amenities walking or biking. So that's another consideration that we kind of brought into this master plan for transportation and circulation. So those are the foundation of that recipe for success that I talked about. With goals, that's kind of like taking the bite-sized piece of that big vision and breaking it down just a little bit more so it becomes into easier action items, which are the strategies. I want to call to attention these pictures here because they really break down the vision statement, goal, and strategy all in one place. So if, for example, you may not have time to read the whole plan, or you're really just interested in seeing the small kind of summary of things, I really recommend you revisit this section of the presentation. It's a quick way to digest it and a great way to get a sense for where the master plan is going. I also want to call to attention this link here. I've peppered it throughout the presentation so you can find it really easily. It's just a survey. That way you guys, when you take a look at these vision statements, the goals, the strategies, you can really submit feedback and say, this goal, we need to go further, we need to do more, or if it's positive, even better. We love to hear that. But I really do want to get everyone's feedback on what your thoughts are on the direction of this plan, whether it's general or really specific to certain goals and strategies. I want to talk a little bit about how to kind of read the master plan, how to use the structure that we created in order to get the most out of it. So when we talk about formatting our goals and strategies, I really want to break it down just a little bit. This here is goal 6, strategy 6.1.4. We're working backwards. So the vision statement for this specific strategy, we're under services and facilities, is to provide those modern and accessible facilities that meet the needs of the entire community and consider the future use of those underutilized facilities. That's the vision statement, the foundation for that recipe for success. The second piece of that recipe is the goal. And this one here is to provide municipal facilities that meet the needs of the entire community. If we're breaking that down a little bit more, what actionable item are we possibly looking at? Our strategy here, which is to develop and implement an ADA self-evaluation and transition plan, really describes the actions the town should take to make progress on the vision statement, on the goal, and really make headway in order to achieve that in that 5 to 10 year timeline. I want to call attention to this gray box here. This is something you'll see on all the strategies in the master plan, and they really talk about who is responsible for it. You have responsible parties, the priority of the strategy, and it tells you whether it's high, low, and also gives you a sense of what that timeline should look like. Is it going to happen in the next 1 to 2 years? That's what we call immediate. Or is that timeline a little bit more flexible, in which case we're looking at 5 years or a little bit longer. We also talk about performance measures, those actions that really prove that we're making progress on achieving these goals and strategies. Some strategies will also integrate example success stories, and this calls out other towns in the region or in our state that also had successful implementation of similar goals and strategies. For example, for this strategy talking about ADA plans, Lakeville and Plainville, both in the southeastern region, also received and were awarded funds to complete their own ADA plans and are now looking at project funds to actually fund the projects that are listed in their plan. In addition, we also outline the complementary strategies that are possibly in other parts of the master plan and have clear kind of connections across one another. So that is one way to read the master plan. I also want to call to attention our priority methodology, how we came up with this, what it means, and how you can really use this as a visual cue to get a sense for a strategy's importance and implementation timeline. As I mentioned, there's a low and a high priority. We're talking about wish list items, but also really impactful strategies. And then we're also looking at our timeline for attention, whether that's flexible or immediate. And immediate, we like to think of as 1 to 2 years of really getting moving on that action item. And then the flexible really describes it's going to take some time. Maybe you need to do a public campaign to gather interest and buy-in from the community, but it gives you a sense for how long those things should take and what kind of actions need to be taken up. I'm going to do one more example with you guys before we run through kind of our next steps, and then I'll open it up to some questions. This here is about housing. So the vision statement that we generated for our housing chapter was to increase Raynham's housing stock and ensure affordability to enable residents to age in community and open Raynham to young families and first-time home buyers. The goal for that vision statement is to focus on diversifying the town's housing stock to meet the needs of the entire community. We can break that down just a little bit further through our strategy, and that's to consider modifications to the existing adult retirement community bylaw to allow those developments in more locations in town. So that's a breakdown of how we generated this recipe for success to make some headway on diversifying our housing in Raynham. We looked at the bylaw, we considered some barriers that could exist and may prevent development of this type, and how we can kind of change that to create more flexibility, but also more opportunities for housing. Again, I'll call attention to the gray box. This strategy is a high priority item and with immediate action. And the responsible parties in town are really the planning department, building commissioner, and the planning board. So they all have to work together to really meet these performance measures. And I'll list those here. So together, they would need to look at the bylaw, complete an assessment, and consider those amendments. And we try to give a timeline as flexible as possible, but also to keep everyone kind of accountable to the process. And then after that, those changes would need to be proposed through the planning board, voted and approved. And then we provide an example success story of how other communities across the region have done the same to great success. So before I open it up, I want to give you guys a kind of sneak peek into what the next steps are for the next month of this workshop. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the general goals of the master plan, guide you through the format, and give you the tools you need to really interact with it. Between now and late February, we'll start to gather public feedback. You can use the survey link that I've inserted throughout this presentation to really share your comments and tell us, did we miss something? Is there something that needs to be clarified, or should we push harder on something? And then lastly, and the next step there is by mid-March, we'll close the survey link. We'll do one last call for public feedback, and we'll start to incorporate those comments into the final draft of the master plan. And then in late March, we'll submit that plan to the planning board and the town. We'll do some presentations that really dive deeper and do a much more detailed overview of what the plan recommends and really sees for the future of the town. And I'll highlight here another link for the feedback form and an opportunity to visit the project webpage. So I want to stop talking for a little bit because I'm sure you guys have heard me enough for tonight. I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask me some questions if you want to read through some of the goals and strategies, or you have questions about particular topics that the master plan covered. I'm happy to do that tonight too. So feel free to raise your hand or use the chat box, whichever one is easier for you.
Elizabeth, this is Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Nice to see you again. Just real quickly, as this master plan as this process materialized, the town's gone through some growing as you've been taking surveys and putting information together. So I'm sure most people on this call know that the dog track, which was a focus of our attention on 138 on the northern section, they've come forward with two large projects to redevelop that site. One of them being 1.1 million square feet of warehouse space, and then another one being a new gaming facility on those two parcels that they'd created there. So some of that infrastructure and the repavement and redevelopment of 138 by the state is actually underway. It's nothing that we need to shepherd with the master plan in that area as that's ongoing, and looks like it's going to happen here in the next 10 to 12 months. Also, as we've been putting together this master plan for us, the Public Safety Committee has been feverishly working on trying to develop and site the public safety building and try to create some kind of a town center, if you will, as you've been talking about, which was something we talked about on the onset of this process. It looks like that facility is going to be located somewhere on the Borden Colony land, near the senior center and the recreation fields, and the offices of the rec department. So somehow the center of town and the center of activity will be somewhere in that area of King Philip Street on the lower section towards South Main Street. So that's something that, obviously, I'm very much looking forward to the nuts and bolts of the plan when it is fully revealed. That being said, I'm also looking for guidance through the master plan for some kind of an overlay on Route 138 that gives the current business and the zoning of DD on that area, also the industrial zoning, some kind of mixed use overlay possibility, leaving out the residential D section, which was obviously something that the people in that area opposed when we tried to bring it forward a couple of years ago. So if that can be a focus of your attention, I think a lot of people are anxious to see what kind of, what kind of ideas come out of the master plan to allow those people in that area, on that zone, if you will, more opportunities to redevelop their properties. Also, while I get the floor, and this is the last thing I want to put forward, is senior housing was something that we really discussed early on, and some kind of incentives for additional senior housing, even if it's by a private developer, or something that would incentivize the creation of more senior housing that could be handled and controlled by the housing department in town. So those are my thoughts and ideas, as they have been all along. And like I said before, I'm looking forward to the nuts and bolts when we get them to target those concerns I just brought forward. Thank you for your help, and I'll let someone else speak, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions? Any topics that you guys have want to discuss a little bit more?
Liz, question about the master plan and how it, the progression in its use. Does Spread produce any kind of report card on the progress over the next, course of the next 10 years?
That's not something that we typically do, but we do provide the town with, if you'll see at the end of the master plan, we provide an implementation table. So that basically puts all of the goals and strategies into a single kind of document where they can kind of keep track of where they're making progress, who's supposed to be addressing those issues. It's not necessarily, it's kind of like a scorecard that you guys can use, but that's not something that we keep track of on a regular basis. But we do try to provide you with as many tools as possible to keep track of that progress.
Thank you.
Hey, Lizette, this is Bob again. I just want to bring something up that kind of concerns me. You mentioned here in this document who's going to shepherd this plan, and you mentioned the planning department, the building commissioner, and the planning board. Well, that kind of points to me in all three directions, and I think members of the committee here and anyone else who comes to these public meetings need to stress to the select board and to whoever else is going to help push this forward, that we need more people besides those three names to shepherd this plan. We need other people involved, and I'm sure we'll have discussions on this, but I'm bringing this forward. So anyone who's listening to this, please bring some ideas forward, because we don't have a town planner. Our planning department consists of Maureen, and as the building commissioner, I'm also the planning board coordinator, but there's no actual planner in the town of Raynham. So like there are in other towns. So again, trying to deflect some of the responsibility off of me, and maybe we can find an appropriate committee or other department in town that can help with the shepherding of this plan.
I definitely hear you, Bob. As I was kind of assigning responsibility for the different strategies of this master plan, oftentimes shepherding the master plan after final delivery does fall heavily on the planning department. Capacity is always an issue with a lot of towns. It's something that's talked about, whether you expand capacity, whether there is an appetite for that. So I think that's something that, as the town looks at the master plan and provides those recommendations, if it's not going to be the planning, department or you, for example, because I know it does fall on you, I think that's something that would be really helpful in really making the master plan honest to the conditions of how the town hall will function. John?
Yeah, I would think that the planning department, I'm not the planning department, I'm sorry, the planning board would be the one to generate the initiatives for these things. For example, we talked about the ARC bylaw, which restricts where where ARCs can be developed. That initiative would have to come from them. They're the ones who rewrite or modify the bylaws to the zoning codes. So I would think the planning board would look on a regular basis at what are some of the initiatives we have in the master plan, and how do we get those things going. That's just my feeling on it, because it certainly doesn't rest on Bob's back. Your thoughts, Bob?
I agree with you, John. I just think other than the planning board, we don't have a planner. We don't actually have a planning department no longer since the last planner moved on. I think there should be more people with their eyes and ears on the plan other than just the planning board, who ultimately are not, they're not public employees. They donate their time for, you were on the planning board. So
yeah.
I think it's an avenue to accomplish things, but I also think there should be more people who are using the plan on a daily or a monthly basis, just to help move it in the right direction.
I think that's a really great point, Bob. Typically, master plans, as you can see, they're pretty hefty documents that they try to accomplish a lot. And while having the support of the planning board and their efforts is really important to getting a lot of these efforts across the line, it's really important to have town staff who are supporting this and kind of working on it as part of their job, really.
Well, I think that says that we might want to suggest then, when this presentation is made, that the town hire a planner, as we have been, like we've had in the past. I know the last two were short-term employees. They didn't, last one of them lasted a year. The last one was 6 months. But maybe we should, pursue that and get a planner.
Why didn't they hire another planner? Was there just no one interested, or what? Like, why would you just give that up? I guess I don't really get that.
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Bob does.
Well, I think the last 2 or 3 planners, the reason why they didn't last long is they found higher paying jobs elsewhere, and there wasn't enough activity to keep them busy or occupied, 4 or 5 days a week. So, those are my thoughts. And then once the last person left, they decided, it was decided that they didn't need a full-time planner. They were going to maybe search out someone part-time, or they were going to outsource it. Then they got me involved with being the planning board coordinator, just helping the planning board through the public, process and some of the applicants. So the actual planner kind of has fallen by the wayside. So it's probably a discussion that needs to be brought up again and revisited. Maybe maybe there's other ways of attacking it, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed.
Ask, is it out of our power or our authority to recommend that as part of this plan, that we have somebody in that position?
So
you can recommend anybody you'd like. I mean, it's up to the committee. It's up to the public at the public meetings to make a recommendation, and then follow through would be through the select board.
And I would also note that it wouldn't be the first time that we recommend expanding capacity as part of a master plan.
Might I suggest that this committee, the master plan committee that we have established here, generate a letter to the selectmen suggesting that the town reinstitute the position of town planner, to monitor or guide the master plan. That's certainly, I mean, writing a letter to them with that suggestion certainly isn't overstepping our authority or our area of responsibility. Obviously, we can't do the hiring, but we can certainly suggest to them that the hiring be done.
John, I think we should digest the plan before we bring that up to the selectmen. And then we can the committee can come up with some kind of implementation process that, maybe Lizette can help us with. But before we read the final document and we understand it all, it might be preemptive to write that letter.
Oh, I wasn't suggesting that we do that now. I meant as part of the plan.
I
you
think with a
saying-
lot of this plan,
Go ahead.
with a lot, this is Matt. I think with a lot of this plan as well, if you look at it, it's broken into, a bunch of different sections: housing, land uses, you have natural and cultural resources. I think a lot of different departments with the town, conservation, everything else should be getting copies of this, be aware of it, and maybe be able to put into their input of expertise as to where, they know more than everyone else as to what they feel may be beneficial in certain chapters, I guess you could say, of this master plan, as, rather than taking it all onto one department's back, spreading it out, have the water department, sewer department, highway department, conservation, everyone take a look at this and maybe feel they have some input on their designated area, I guess you could say, of expertise.
Yeah,
I think that's a
going down,
really
that's
great
going down the
point.
right path. Absolutely. Going down the right path, Matt, with that idea.
And I should note that the planning department isn't listed on every single strategy. Like, for example, we're in transportation and circulation. A lot of that does fall on to the highway department, for example. But for some of the more, when we're talking about like town center, some of those more involved activities that require like public engagement, that require buy-in from the community, those more heavy lifts, they do tend to fall to the planning department and essentially Bob. So yeah, we do really want to think about that and get people's buy-in. I know when I was developing these, I would try to speak to the departments as often as I could, kind of bouncing these off them, so that way they're well aware of what's being put into the master plan, or should be at this point. But I think a fresh look with the completed document would be great. Any other questions, any topics? I think implementation is really great to be talking about right now. That way we can get ahead of it. And since we do have some time to obviously edit the document and change things up before we, present it to the planning board and town meeting and stuff like that, we should definitely take the time to make those, to think about that process, because it is going to be a long process.
The implementation can also be accomplished by a committee. It could be a committee of department heads, that collaborate once a quarter or once a month, and then they can brainstorm, or they can shepherd the document through also. So that's another possibility. I don't know if you've seen that elsewhere, Lizette, but that's certainly.
Yeah, it's not unheard of. We've definitely seen in other communities where they'll do kind of how we have the master plan committee now. They'll have a master plan implementation committee that, like you said, is often made up of those department heads and high responsible parties that are named in the plan, to make sure that, we're all kind of keeping each other in check and making progress on the different things that we said we would. That's something that can also be integrated into the master plan itself. It often falls under we tend to put it under the services and facilities chapter, because it talks about expanding capacity. And because implementation of this plan is so important, that's something that we could talk about adding to the master plan if that's of interest. So I don't want to take up any more of anyone's time. If we don't have any other questions, I do want to reiterate that I am available by email. If you want to have a call with me, I'm also available. I'm happy to take your feedback in any way, shape, or form that you would like to share it. I do recommend using the comment form if possible, but just to let you know, I am available for a conversation if that's something that you'd like to have. I want to thank you guys for coming and showing up tonight. I know that this was a later meeting than usual, but I think it was really successful in having that conversation about where we need to look forward and how we can move forward with the master plan. You can expect to see another presentation, more detailed, really talking about those broader goals in the master plan towards the end of March. So keep an eye out for that date. We'll be posting that on our social media as well, just that way you guys can get those links. But until then, I really hope you guys have a chance to read the master plan. Like I said, there's the full document on the website. And actually, you know, I'll take some time to show that to you guys. The full document on the website. It's located under workshops. You can find the recording of Monday's meeting here. The full presentation is listed, and you can click on this icon here and it'll pop up the full master plan, and the public comment form is right underneath it. Okay. So again, thank you everyone for showing up and sharing your thoughts and really listening in. But I hope you guys have a good night.